The morning sky above Singapore was painted in soft gold when Captain Alina Hayes walked toward the aircraft parked at Gate 17. The Boeing 737 shimmered in the sunlight. Routine flight, 9:08 bound for Sydney. For the passengers, it was just another journey across the ocean. For her, it was supposed to be an ordinary day. Calm skies, clear weather, predictable winds. But fate had written something far greater. Alina had flown hundreds of flights over her career as a commercial airline pilot. Calm, focused, and respected by her crew, she was known for her precision and quiet confidence. Few people knew that years before, she had once been among the world's elite. A fighter pilot with a past she never spoke about. She had left that life behind after a classified mission had gone wrong, leaving her haunted by the memory of a comrade she couldn't save. Since then, she had chosen peace, commercial skies far from combat zones. As the passengers boarded, her co-pilot made the final checks. Alina scanned the flight plan. Over the Java Sea, crossing northern Australia, then descending into Sydney. Nothing unusual. She looked out the cockpit window, took a quiet breath, and signed the final clearance. At 8:42 a.m., Flight 908 began its takeoff roll. The engines roared, the ground blurred, and the aircraft lifted effortlessly into the sky. For the next 2 hours, everything was normal. The seatbelt signs turned off. Coffee was served. Children laughed in row 22. The hum of the engines blended with soft chatter. Serenity at 35,000 feet. But at 11:06 a.m., Serenity shattered. Without warning, a loud metallic bang echoed through the fuselage. The right engine burst into sparks. Warning alarms filled the cockpit. Within seconds, the plane began to shudder. The engine instruments spiked, then flatlined. The aircraft was now flying on one engine, but barely. Alina's instincts took over. She didn't panic, didn't flinch. Years of combat training kicked in like second nature. She feathered the failing engine, stabilized the yaw, and initiated an emergency descent to 20,000 feet. Passengers screamed as oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling. But in the cockpit, her voice, calm and firm, guided her team through every move. As they descended, a second warning blared, fuel pressure dropping. The explosion had ruptured a line feeding the left tank. Fuel was leaking fast. They had maybe 30 minutes before total engine loss. She requested an emergency diversion to Darwin, the nearest major airfield. But the math didn't add up. The plane was too heavy, the winds were shifting, and at their rate of descent, they wouldn't make it. For the first time in years, Alina felt that same silence she had known in combat. The sound right before disaster. The world outside the window turned gray. Thick storm clouds began forming below. Thunder rolled through the horizon, and flashes of lightning lit up the distant sea. Radar confirmed a storm system spreading fast along their path. There was no clear route around it. She looked at the instrument panel. The flight controls trembled. Autopilot struggled to hold altitude. If they lost the second engine over the ocean, the aircraft would not stay airborne for more than 10 minutes. The storm was coming closer. She could feel the cabin temperature drop as ice built up on the windows. Her co-pilot scanned emergency checklists, trying to maintain radio contact. Static filled the channel. No one was answering from air traffic control. The storm had begun interfering with communications. Alina had been here before, not in a commercial jet, but in the chaos of a dogfight where seconds meant survival. She knew this silence, this isolation, and she knew one thing above all: the only way out was through. She made a decision. Instead of turning away from the storm, she adjusted course directly into it, dropping altitude to stay under the most turbulent layers. The cabin lights flickered as they entered the cloud wall. Sheets of rain slammed against the fuselage. Lightning flashed inches from the wings. Every passenger felt the aircraft lurch violently as turbulence gripped them. Drinks spilled, cries echoed, but Alina's hands never left the controls. Her focus narrowed to a single goal: keep the plane flying. Minutes passed like hours. Every gauge felt like a countdown. The left engine groaned under strain. The power readings fluctuated dangerously. Alina adjusted the thrust manually, fighting both wind and gravity. Then, a brief break in the clouds revealed a glimpse of blue water below. But it wasn't open ocean. It was land, a small stretch of coastline breaking through the storm. According to her calculations, it was part of Timor Island. a region with few runways and no major airport capable of handling a 737. She checked the map again. There was one small airstrip, a military base, long abandoned, used decades ago by the Air Force. The runway length was barely enough, and no modern equipment was guaranteed to be working, but it was their only chance. Alina tightened her harness. Her mind was quiet now. For the first time in years, she felt that same pulse, the one she had buried when she left the fighter jets behind, the calm that came when everything else fell apart. The storm thickened again. Visibility dropped to almost zero. She began the emergency descent manually, aligning the aircraft with coordinates of the old base. The terrain radar warned of rising mountains. One wrong move and they'd vanish into the hillside. Oxygen low, fuel lower. As they broke through the final layer of clouds, the outline of the island appeared. Green hills, cliffs, and in the middle of it, a faint gray strip, the runway, half covered in vegetation. But it was real. She didn't know if the ground would hold, or if the brakes would fail, or if there were even rescue teams nearby. But it didn't matter. Her hands steadied the yoke. Her heart slowed. Flight 908 was going in. Rain hammered the cockpit windows as Flight 908 descended through thick, churning clouds. The altimeter dropped fast, too fast. Every second mattered now. The remaining fuel indicator blinked red, counting down what could be their final minutes in the air. Captain Alina Hayes didn't blink. Her eyes locked on the horizon line, searching for that narrow strip of land she had seen minutes earlier. A forgotten airbase in the middle of nowhere. The storm raged like a living thing. Lightning danced across the sky, white flashes that blinded the cockpit for split seconds. The wind hit from the side, pushing the plane off alignment. The aircraft shuddered violently. Alarms screamed, and still, her grip on the yoke stayed firm. Behind her, 185 passengers held onto their seats, faces pale in the flickering light. But Alina didn't hear them anymore. All she could hear was the steady pulse of the remaining engine, and her own breathing. The ground radar flickered again. They were now at 5,000 feet. The terrain below was uneven. Mountains, jungle, and cliffs. The map said the airstrip was barely long enough for a small cargo plane, but the 737 was heavy, almost out of control. It didn't matter. There were no other options. She banked left slightly, bringing the nose toward the coordinates. The clouds parted for a heartbeat, and there it was. A gray stretch of cracked concrete, lined with palm trees, half buried under green vines. The old Timor Air Force Base, long abandoned, forgotten by the world, and now their only chance at life. The plane jolted as turbulence hit again. The left wing dipped dangerously low, inches from a spiral. Alina corrected with calm precision. Her combat reflexes took over. Smooth, exact, unshakable. She initiated the final descent. Speed 240 knots, altitude 2,000 feet. Distance to runway 12 kilometers. Fuel remaining, less than 4%. The co-pilot read instruments aloud, voice trembling, but Alina barely noticed. She was already running hundreds of calculations in her mind. Angle, drag wind direction, and landing gear stress limits. The numbers didn't favor survival, but she had done the impossible before. The rain grew heavier. The windshield wipers screamed against the glass. The autopilot disengaged. Manual control only. Warning lights flooded the panel. The right engine temperature spiked again. It wouldn't hold much longer. At 1,200 feet, the island appeared below like a ghost from the storm. Dense green hills gave way to cliffs, then a flat clearing where the broken runway waited. The visibility was barely a kilometer, the sky tinted gray and silver. She lined up the nose perfectly with the narrow strip. No guidance systems, no ILS, just instinct. Flaps full. Landing gear down. The sound of metal locking in place echoed like a heartbeat. The crosswinds slammed into the fuselage, pushing it sideways. Alina adjusted with minute precision, dipping the nose to maintain stability. The stall warning blared. Speed dropped below safety limits. But she had to slow down, or they'd overshoot the runway and crash into the forest. At 500 feet, lightning struck the water nearby, illuminating the shape of the runway. It looked impossibly small, but it was there. She exhaled once, then began the flare. The plane hit the runway hard. Tires screeched, sparks flew, wings flexed violently. The nose gear collapsed halfway, sending shockwaves through the fuselage. Luggage burst from overhead compartments. Passengers screamed. But Alina kept her hands steady. She reverse thrust manually, pushing the only working engine to its final limits. The brakes groaned, hydraulic pressure failing. The aircraft skidded across cracked concrete, smoke rising from the tires. And then a silence. The 737 came to a halt just 20 meters before the edge of the runway, where grass and jungle began. Rain poured over the motionless jet. Inside, everything was still. Oxygen masks swung in the air. A baby cried softly. They had made it. For a moment, Alina didn't move. She looked through the window at the storm clearing above the island, a faint line of sunlight breaking through. Then she powered down the remaining systems and unbuckled. Her co-pilot stared at her in disbelief, but she didn't speak. She just closed her eyes and took one slow breath. The emergency doors opened and rain-washed air rushed in. Passengers began evacuating, stepping into the mud of the overgrown runway, some crying, some kneeling in shock. Alina helped guide them out, her voice calm and steady even as exhaustion trembled through her hands. Within minutes, all 185 passengers stood safely outside. The aircraft, though damaged, hadn't exploded or caught fire. The storm had passed. The jungle around them was silent, except for the sound of wind and rain. It was over, at least for now. But just as she began to contact rescue through emergency radio frequencies, a sound echoed across the horizon, a deep, distant rumble. Alina turned toward the sky. Through the thinning clouds, 2 military fighter jets appeared, streaking low across the island, circling the downed plane. The roar of their engines thundered through the valley. For a moment, everyone froze, staring up in confusion. But Alina didn't. Her expression changed. Not fear, not surprise, but recognition. She knew that sound. She knew that formation. The jets tilted their wings, signaling something, a maneuver only trained pilots understood. Her past had just found her. Within minutes, one of the jets lowered altitude and dropped a flare, a signal for visual contact. The emergency radio crackled alive for the first time since the storm began. Static, then a voice, clear, commanding, and familiar. The rescue had come. But they weren't just rescuers. They were from the same Top Gun squadron Alina once belonged to, the very life she had tried to leave behind. The island wasn't random. The airstrip wasn't forgotten. It was once her base, the place she had sworn she'd never return to. As rain poured down and the fighter jets circled above, Captain Alina Hayes realized the truth. Fate hadn't just tested her skills. It had led her back to where it all began, and the world was about to learn who she really was. The storm had finally begun to fade, but the air above the island still carried the echo of thunder. Below, Flight 908 rested broken but intact, its silver body lying still on the cracked runway, surrounded by mist and palm trees bending in the wind. Captain Alina Hayes stood outside the aircraft, soaked to the bone, her uniform torn by the rain and chaos. Around her, 185 passengers gathered in silence, still trembling, still realizing they were alive. The roar of the fighter jets circling above grew louder. They weren't random rescue planes. Alina knew that pattern, that precision. The way they banked and circled meant something. They were scanning for identification, confirming coordinates. Not just responding, searching. As the clouds broke, sunlight finally touched the island. A sharp, golden light glinting off the jets as they descended. The symbols on their wings came into view. U.S. Air Force insignia. Alina's eyes narrowed. That meant one thing. They knew exactly who had landed here. One jet broke formation and dipped lower, releasing a flare that illuminated the entire runway. The sound was deafening. The passengers shielded their eyes. Then the fighter tilted its wing, a silent salute, but not to the passengers. To her. Her past was no longer hidden. Before Alina Hayes wore the crisp blue uniform of a commercial airline pilot, she had worn another, matte black flight suit, helmet marked with the insignia of the Falcon Squadron, one of the most elite Top Gun units ever formed. Her codename had been Valkyrie. She was the youngest pilot in her class. With unmatched control, the kind of instinct you can't teach, she flew missions others wouldn't dare, high-risk intercepts, deep airspace entries, and once, A classified rescue in hostile territory. That mission changed everything. A coded operation that went wrong. An ambush. And a fellow pilot, her closest friend, lost in the explosion that followed. Though she survived, the guilt never left her. She resigned quietly, vanishing into civilian life under a new name, leaving the Air Force believing she was gone for good. Until now. Back in the present, the radio inside the cockpit crackled with static. Then a voice, deep, authoritative, and familiar, broke through. It wasn't air traffic control. It wasn't rescue command. It was military channel frequency. The fighter jets had switched to a code that only combat-trained pilots would recognize. They were speaking directly to her. Alina climbed back into the cockpit, dripping water onto the panels. Her co-pilot watched her, confused, but she said nothing. She tuned the emergency radio manually, adjusting the frequency knob to the pattern she remembered from years ago. The static cleared and replaced by short, coded bursts. She understood them instantly. They had tracked the emergency beacon from her aircraft, not because it was a civilian distress call, but because it used an encrypted identifier embedded in her flight ID, one that no commercial pilot should have. It was an old tag, tied to her military file, a tag that was supposed to be deactivated forever. The jets had been sent to investigate who had used it, and now they knew. Outside, the passengers saw the jets circling lower, one of them releasing a smoke flare as it signaled toward the island's far end. A minute later, a dark gray helicopter emerged through the clouds, a military rescue transport, fast and low skimming over the treetops. Dust and rain whipped across the runway as it landed near the damaged 737. Soldiers stepped out, scanning the wreck, securing the perimeter. One of them approached Alina slowly, recognizing her even before she spoke. The insignia on his arm, a falcon. He saluted her. She didn't return it. She simply stared past him, toward the jets hovering above. Memories flooded her, years of silence broken in an instant. The rescue team began escorting passengers to safety, setting up medical tents and supply drops. Alina helped organize the evacuation, her face calm, her commands sharp and clear. The same discipline, the same control. But the soldiers were watching her, whispering among themselves. The pilot who had saved 185 lives wasn't just a hero. She was one of them, once the best among them. Hours later, as the last passengers boarded rescue helicopters, Alina stood alone on the runway. The wreckage of Flight 908 lay silent behind her. The storm clouds had cleared, and the sea beyond the island shimmered under fading sunlight. Then a shadow passed over her. The lead fighter jet descended, flying low one final time. It rolled its wings once, the Top Gun signal of honor, before turning toward the horizon. For years she had tried to bury that part of herself, the soldier, the fighter, the legend called Valkyrie. But destiny had dragged her back into the skies, forcing her to remember what she was capable of. And as the helicopter lifted her away from the island, she realized something. She hadn't just saved 185 lives. She had saved herself from the weight of guilt that had followed her since the day she left the Air Force. The world would know her as Captain Alina Hayes, the pilot who pulled off the impossible landing. But to those who flew the skies beside her, she would always be something else. Valkyrie, the Top Gun who came back. The rescue operation on Timor Island stretched into the night. Under the glow of floodlights, soldiers moved across the muddy runway, loading passengers into transport helicopters one group at a time. The jungle roared quietly around them, and the sound of rotors filled the air like a steady heartbeat. Captain Alina Hayes stood apart, watching the final helicopter lift away into the gray dawn sky. For the first time since the crash, there was silence. No engines, no alarms, no screaming winds. Just the soft rustle of rain dripping from leaves and the hum of the distant ocean. The aircraft she had saved, Flight 908, lay broken but peaceful. Its metal reflected the first rays of sunrise, the same sun that had seen them take off the morning before. 185 souls were alive because she refused to surrender. She should have felt relief. But something deeper stirred inside her, a pull toward the horizon, the same feeling she once had before every mission. She turned when she heard footsteps behind her. A man in uniform approached, the same insignia she once wore, the Falcon Squadron. He handed her a small data slate, its screen flickering with military clearance codes. Her name, Valkyrie, was back on active record. For a moment, she simply stared at it. 12 years she had lived under silence, hiding her past, pretending to be just another pilot, but the world no longer saw her that way. News agencies had already picked up the signal. Female pilot saves 1 to 85 lives in impossible landing, and someone, somewhere, had recognized her name. By noon, a transport plane had arrived to take her back to Darwin Air Base, the same base she had trained in long ago, but now it felt like a ghost of her former life. When the aircraft landed, military personnel stood at attention on the tarmac. The old emblem of her squadron gleamed under the Australian sun, a falcon in flight. The commanding officer stepped forward, saluted her, and led her into a hangar filled with silent faces. Pilots, engineers, commanders. Some of them remembered her. Others had only heard stories of the Valkyrie, the woman who once took a crippled jet into enemy airspace to save her wingman. And now she had done it again. This time not for one man, but for 185 strangers. In that hangar, they showed her something. A sleek, matte gray F-39 prototype, a next-generation fighter built for impossible missions. Her old world stared back at her, waiting. But Alina wasn't there for glory. She stepped closer, touched the cold metal of the aircraft, and saw her reflection, older, steadier, but still carrying the same fire. The officer explained quietly. A global emergency mission had been approved. A high-altitude reconnaissance flight over unstable airspace, where no autopilot or drone could survive the winds. They needed a human pilot, someone with impossible calm, absolute precision, and the will to face the unknown. There was only one name on the list. She didn't answer immediately. Her mind flashed to the passengers, the terrified faces, the cries, the silence after landing. She remembered the child who had smiled through tears as soldiers carried him to safety. That memory was worth more than any medal or rank. But then she looked back at the fighter jet, the same sky that had once taken everything from her, now asking her to trust it again. This wasn't about revenge or redemption. It was about doing what she was meant to do. She nodded once. That night she suited up again. The black flight suit fit like memory, heavy with purpose. The helmet slid into place, the Falcon insignia gleaming faintly under hangar lights. Her call sign was patched onto the chest, Valkyrie. As the hangar doors opened, the world outside glowed with twilight, the horizon burning gold and crimson. The engines of the F-39 came alive with a deep, rolling growl. Dust swirled around her boots as she climbed into the cockpit. The control systems responded instantly to her touch. The screens lit up, clean, futuristic, familiar. Her heartbeat synced with the hum of the jet. From the control tower, one voice cut through the static. "Clear skies, Valkyrie." She pushed the throttle. The jet accelerated down the runway, faster, faster, until the earth disappeared beneath her. For the first time in years, she was flying not away from her past, but toward it. Above the clouds, the world opened wide. The sun broke through, flooding the sky in molten gold. The ocean shimmered below, endless and calm. She remembered everything, the fear, the pain, the loss, and the reason she kept going. Flying wasn't just what she did. It was what she was. At 40,000 feet, the comms crackled again. Her new mission had begun. A course correction flashed on the screen, guiding her toward the edge of the world map. She smiled faintly behind the visor. The legend had returned to the sky, not as a soldier, not as a commercial pilot, but as the woman who carried hope wherever she flew. Weeks later, the world learned her full story. News headlines called her the Angel of Flight 908. Documentaries spoke of her skill, her calm, and her secret past as a Top Gun fighter ace. But Alina Hayes never appeared on television again. She disappeared quietly after her final mission, leaving behind only one message recorded in her flight log. Every flight is a second chance. For them, for me, for the sky. And somewhere high above the clouds, a single streak of silver still crossed the horizon. A reminder that legends never really land. Valkyrie had taken flight once more,